If you stand at the ticket gates of Parramatta train station, you're standing in the geographical centre of modern Sydney. It's a world of glass towers, government super departments, and the shiny, sterilised aesthetic of corporate Australia. Walk 10 minutes south, past the Westfield and across the intersection at Park Street, and the city simply dissolves. The air changes first. The smell of exhaust fumes and eucalyptus vanishes, replaced by a heavy, complex scent of charcoal smoke, frying ghee, and cardamom. The polite silence of the suburbs is broken by the thump of Punjabi pop music rattling the windows of a passing Toyota Camry. You've arrived in Harris Park, or as the official government website now calls it, Little India. Most Australians know this place exists, but few realise just how total the transformation there has been. The suburb has effectively bypassed the slow blend of multiculturalism and jumped straight to saturation. According to the latest census data, nearly 90% of the residents in this specific pocket have parents born overseas, with the vast majority hailing from one specific subcontinent. Walking down Wigram Street on a Friday night feels less like Western Sydney and more like a district in Mumbai, or perhaps the expat quarters of Dubai. For some, this suburb is the ultimate Australian success story, a goldmine of culture, food, and 24-hour enterprise that rose from a rundown slum. For others, it's a flashpoint, a terrifying visual example of failed assimilation and immigration settings left on high for too long. But the story of Harris Park is bigger than just food and race. It's a story about economics, zoning loopholes, and global geopolitics playing out on 3 suburban streets. How did a sleepy, working-class postcode of heritage cottages turn into a geopolitical asset hosted by prime ministers? Was this a government master plan, or did it just happen? To understand the Harris Park of today, we have to look at the bones of the place. We have to understand why it even exists physically. If we rewind the clock to the 1980s, Harris Park was essentially the poor cousin of Parramatta. It was working class, quiet, and honestly, a bit rough around the edges. You had a demographic mix of older Anglo-Australians and a wave of post-war Lebanese and Greek migrants who bought here because it was affordable and close to the factories at Camellia and Clyde. It was a dormitory suburb in the most boring sense of the word, a place where the shops shut tight at 5 p.m. on the dot, leaving the streets pitch black and silent for the rest of the night. Now, usually in Sydney, when a suburb sits right next to a booming CBD like Parramatta, the sharks start circling. Developers swoop in, they buy up the blocks, they bulldoze the houses, and they put up 50-story concrete apartments. We've seen it happen in Woolly Creek, in Rhodes, and in Burwood. But that didn't happen here, and the reason is the most boring thing in the world: local council zoning. Harris Park is full of what we call Federation-era cottages and California bungalows. These are small, detached houses built in the 1920s with brick pillars and front porches. Because of their historical value, the Parramatta Council slapped heritage conservation orders on them. Developers looked at the map, saw the heritage restrictions, and realized they couldn't tear the houses down to build skyscrapers, and so they moved on. They left Harris Park alone. This accidental heritage trap is the secret ingredient that made Little India possible. When the surge of South Asian migration arrived in the 2000s, the option to build vertical towers simply didn't exist. So instead of reshaping the skyline, the community reshaped the usage, repurposing the existing heritage shells from the inside out. Think about the architecture. Those front verandas were originally built for British settlers to drink tea and watch the sunset. They turned out to be the perfect architectural feature for outdoor Indian dining. The living rooms, designed for 1920s families, converted easily into sari shops and accounting firms. The heritage rules inadvertently preserved a village layout that allowed a street life to flourish. You can't have a street festival in the lobby of a high-rise apartment block. You need a street, and you need shop fronts that open onto the pavement. So, while the rest of Sydney was turning into glass and concrete vertical cities, Harris Park stayed horizontal. It kept its human scale, and that human scale is exactly what allowed the community to take ownership of the streets. Long before the entrepreneurs arrived to hang their neon signs, the demographic foundation of Harris Park was being laid by a very different group: international students. In the late 90s and early 2000s, universities started aggressively marketing to international students. Education became one of Australia's biggest exports, rivaling coal and iron ore. We wanted the tuition fees, and Indian families were willing to pay them for a shot at a Western degree, and, crucially, the pathway to permanent residency that came with it. Thousands of young Indian men arrived in Sydney with three things: a student visa, a massive loan to pay off back home, and a desperate need for cheap rent. Fresh off the plane at Sydney Airport, they faced a brutal reality check. The city and eastern suburbs were financially impossible, and while Parramatta offered jobs, its shiny new high-rises came with a price tag that a student budget simply couldn't touch. Harris Park, sitting right next door, was the bargain bin. The suburb was full of those 1970s red brick walk-up apartment blocks, the ugly 3-story blocks with no elevators. They were cheap and unglamorous, but they were available. This created what sociologists and urban planners called a dormitory suburb. Landlords, often earlier migrants themselves, realized they could rent out a 2-bedroom unit, not just to a single family, but to 4 or 5 students, splitting the cost. It became a bachelor pad economy where the demographic was overwhelmingly young, male, and constantly on the move. The number of people per bedroom skyrocketed, creating a shadow economy that pushed the limits of occupancy. Standard apartments were converted into high-capacity dorms where mattresses covered the floorboards, living rooms were subdivided by makeshift curtains, and shift workers practiced hot bedding or the rotating usage of the same sleeping space around the clock. For a solid decade, Harris Park was where many Indians first arrived, while they studied accounting or IT, worked 7-Eleven shifts, and saved every cent to send back home. It was grim, crowded, and was invisible to most of Sydney. The rest of the city drove past it on the freeway and saw nothing but red brick and silence. Commercial evolution is usually a slow process. A shop changes hands here, a sign changes there, maybe a cafe opens. In Harris Park, it felt like a dam broke. The early commercial scene was strictly utilitarian. A strip of grocery stores stacked with 20-kilo bags of basmati rice and international calling cards, flanked by basic takeaway joints that served as quick, cheap pit stops for the students living in the crowded flats. But then, the expat effect kicked in. As the people who had arrived in the 90s got their degrees, got their PR, and moved out to bigger houses, they were craving a cultural anchor. They craved a place that felt like home. The businesses on Wigram Street recognized a lucrative shift in their clientele. Alongside the students, they saw a new wave of wealthy families arriving in drones, ready to pay a premium for a genuine taste of home. People stopped seeing generic butter chicken and naan tailored for white palates, and instead, they got hyper-regional street food. The arrival of places like Chatkas introduced the chaotic, high-speed energy of Mumbai street food to Sydney, piling tables high with pav bhaji, vada pav, and chole bhature. Authentic, spice-heavy vegetarian snacks sold at prices that undercut the competition and packed the dining room every night. Suddenly, Friday nights in Harris Park transformed. Families who had moved out to the wealthier Hills District, for example, started driving back on Friday nights. You'd see luxury Mercedes SUVs parked next to beat-up student Corollas. Competition became fierce because there were 20 restaurants in 3 blocks. You just couldn't serve bad food and survive. If your dosa wasn't crispy or your biryani was dry, you were out of business in a month. This density forced the quality up. It made Harris Park the undisputed heavyweight champion of Indian food in Australia. By the 2021 census, the data confirmed that Harris Park was over 50% Indian born or claiming Indian ancestry. Today, in the core streets, that number might be even higher. It created a self-sustaining ecosystem. You could arrive from India, rent a bed in Harris Park from an Indian landlord, get a cash-in-hand job at a restaurant in Harris Park, buy your groceries from an Indian grocer, and send money home via an Indian transfer service. You could effectively live your entire life without ever really needing to engage with mainstream Anglo-Australia. And that level of insulation, well, that's where the friction starts. Let's be real about the optics. We can't tell this story without acknowledging the tension. For some Australians, Harris Park is a nightmare. Harris Park represents a total transformation of the Australia they grew up with. Critics look at the streets and see a suburb that's turned its back on assimilation. There's a genuine feeling of displacement among the pre-existing community. They talk about feeling pushed out by the sheer weight of cultural change. When the local newsagent becomes a Bollywood video store, and the local butcher becomes a sari shop, and the language on the street shifts to Hindi or Gujarati, the people who were there first feel like strangers in their own home. But while concerns about assimilation were and are still growing, the Australian government went in a completely different direction. They saw money and geopolitics. The reality of the 2020s is that Australia is terrified of China. To counter China's influence in the Pacific, Australia has joined the Quad, a strategic alliance with the USA, Japan, and India. Whether Aussies like it or not, India is an important ally. We need their trade to replace Chinese markets, we need some sort of migration to fill labor shortages, and we need them as a military ally. So the federal government made a calculated decision. Instead of trying to assimilate Harris Park and break it up, they decided to weaponize it as a soft power asset. This strategy reached its absolute peak in May 2023 when Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down in Sydney. Modi filled the Kudos Bank Arena with 20,000 screaming fans, mostly from the Indian diaspora of course, and standing right next to him was Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, grinning ear to ear, calling Modi the boss. Together, they officially unveiled the Little India Gateway. The Australian government essentially rubber-stamped an ethnic enclave, and they poured millions of dollars of grant money into streetscapes, lighting, and branding. Forget the politics for a second though, what's it actually like to stand on Wigram Street right now? The food scene anchors the entire precinct, ranging from the spectacle of Dosa Hut, where the paper-thin dosas spill over the edges of the plate, to the quiet endurance of Taj Indian Sweets and Restaurant. When Taj first opened in the late 90s, then residentially zoned Wigram Street was still dominated by old cottages and felt pretty quiet after dark. 2 decades later, they're selling vegetarian thalis and Diwali sweets by the truckload, an early bet that paid off once Little India exploded around them. But look closer and you see the cracks in the facade. The infrastructure is groaning. Those roads weren't built for 1,000 Uber Eats drivers and weekend tourists in SUVs. Parking is a contact sport. If you try and bring a car here on a Saturday night, you're gonna lose your mind. And the bachelor issue hasn't gone away. The rental crisis in Sydney means that the overcrowding in these red brick flats is intense. You have international students paying a fortune just to share a room. Harris Park forces us to ask a difficult question about what Australia is becoming. For decades, our model of multiculturalism was about scattering. The idea that migrants would arrive, they would spread out across the city, and they would blend in. We can call this the melting pot. Harris Park represents a different model, the mosaic. Distinct, solid blocks of single cultures sitting next to each other. So, is this bad? Economically, it generates millions in revenue, it employs thousands of people, and it's turned a rundown, forgotten area into a tourism destination that people fly interstate to visit. For new migrants, it provides a safety net and stops them from feeling isolated and depressed. It allows them to navigate the terrifying experience of moving to a new country by giving them a soft landing where people speak their language and eat their food. But socially, it challenges the idea of a cohesive national identity. If you can live, work, pray, and socialize in Harris Park without ever needing to speak to someone outside your culture, are you really living in Australia? Or are you just living in a franchise of India located on Australian soil? The Little India rebranding suggests the argument is over. We've accepted the trade-off. We have Chinatowns, we have Little Italys, and now, officially, we have Little India. The government has looked at the numbers and decided that the economic benefit of the mosaic outweighs the social idea of the melting pot. Harris Park happened because of a convergence of 4 things. A booming education export industry, a heritage zoning quirk that prevented high-rises, the sheer unstoppable hustle of a migrant community looking for a foothold, and, of course, government policy. It's a place where you can get a haircut at a Desi salon, watch the cricket on a giant screen with 1,000 screaming fans, and eat the best gulab jamun of your life, all while standing on a street originally named after a British surgeon. While other main streets in Australia are dying, filled with police signs, empty windows, and newsagents selling black market cigarettes, Harris Park is booming. It's awake when the rest of the city is asleep. So then, I leave it to the viewers. Is it a good thing that we have suburbs dedicated to specific cultures, or does it damage the social fabric of the country? And if you've been to Harris Park, let us know where the absolute best spot for curry is, and if Chatkaz is actually overrated. Let us know all your thoughts in the comments section below, and I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the changing face of Australia. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next investigation. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.